Hey, what is up lads? If you're new to the game, you came across the right video. I'm going to explain the basics and things which you can learn over thousands of hours of playing the game, and toward the end of the video, I'm going to be showing you some more advanced tips for improving at the game too. Let's get right into it. Alright, for tip number 1, you have to pick the right server for what type of player you are. If you're not too serious and you don't have that many hours in the game, if you have less than 500 say, then I would recommend playing on an easier server and not playing on the servers like AU main, US main. Any of those main servers are quite difficult and full of really good players. So I'd recommend playing on servers that are like Happus or Savus, which usually have a lot more of an easy audience and usually filled up with people who don't PvP too seriously. So it'll be a lot more fun and you'll surround yourself with players who are a lot more similar to you. I would recommend playing on a server with a low population and a decently small map, so you spend less time running around. And also because small map servers are usually associated with not as experienced players, so they're going to be a lot more fun if you aren't very experienced too. So make sure you're playing on a server which has players similar to you, so you have the most fun and you aren't competing with people with 10 times as many hours as you. First of all, I think is base building. I'm going to break it into little pieces so it's easy to understand. Essentially your base is made to store all of your loot and to live out of, so all of your progress is stored inside of it. So it is pretty much essential that it is strong enough to defend against a raid, because the last thing you want is everything you worked for to be taken overnight because somebody saw you walk into your base with gear. You build a base with the building plan and hammer, and both of which are made out of wood. This makes a twig draft of your base design, which you can then upgrade with wood, stone, metal and high core. I personally never build bases out of wood, and I go right to upgrading them out of stone, as there really isn't much point to building out of wood when stone is so easy to get, and wood has to be used for so many other things, so it's really not worth it using it for a base. I have made videos about bunker base designs to create, but on the first day of your wipe, you're just going to want to build a basic 2x1 with an airlock. They are quite effective and super cheap to store loot on your first day, and they of course have 3 doors or 1 stone water break, so they're decently secure for a first day of loot. Of course you want to scale your base design with how much loot you have inside of it, and the more precious stuff you have inside, the more you want to defend it, and of course the bigger your size of the group, also the bigger the base needs to be. So you have enough space to place on bags or beds, and also just to fit all your teammates. There are countless videos on YouTube about how to build the so-called best solo bases and best trio bases, so if you need a good design, Google them and create those bases, and they shouldn't be too hard to follow. Now separate from base building is just getting the loot to fill your base up. This arguably is the most fun part of Rust. PvP and farming for loot to use to get even more loot, which is called snowballing, as it works like a snowball falling down a hill. The more loot you have, the easier it is to gain momentum and gain even more loot, as you have the adequate weapons to PvP effectively. Once you have your first gun of the wipe, getting even more is easy work, but if you're new to the game, I would recommend blueprinting the gun and then farming the barrels that spawn on the road to craft even more, so if you do lose the gun in a fight, you have multiple backups. It just depends on how you like to play the game. The point of Rust to majority of people is to reach the end game. The end game mostly consists of having multiple AKs or a good amount of gear, so you don't have to farm anymore and can just PvP for the rest of the wipe. I know not all people play like this, but this is what I and the people I play with like to play Rust like. Ways to get loot and also tips for farming materials for a base effectively. The way I get my first gun usually, and how I start all my wipes, is basically by running around, gathering tons of barrels on the side of a road on the way to outpost. This is usually quite far away from where I spawn, so I get tons of road farm on the way there to create crossbows and nail guns, and lots of gear. Nail gun is one of my favourite early game weapons. You use it like a shotgun almost, and it can kill people with guns even if you're good enough with it. Once you have this basic gear from outpost, I use the stone I found on the way to trade for wood at the vending machine, but not all of it of course, because I need some to actually build the base. and I usually have enough from that to build a simple 2x1 base design, which I can use to store any of the loot I get lucky enough to grab in an early game fight. Make sure that if you're playing with a group, you exchange some of your scrap for metal fragments so you can make a code lock. Ideally, I find more people similarly geared to me to build up a reserve of early game loot so that I can then use to try and kill a geared player with a gun, and hopefully some meds. Once I have this gun, the snowball starts, and I keep PvPing to get more and more loot, and once I've gotten plenty of loot, I usually stop PvPing and focus on farming more stone and metal to upgrade my base so I don't get raided by the people I killed. A few tips on how to do this well is build near the snow and near monuments, so you can go to the snow to get a bunch of stone and metal. Spawn rates inside of the snow are higher, so you'll find these things a lot easier, and monuments of course have lots of barrels and crates, so getting high tiered weapons and workbenches becomes easier. There are also hotspots for PvP and a good place to snowball. Make sure to blueprint lots of things so you can make them to get more of them, just in case you die. Farming is like the fuel to your PvP, so make sure you don't skip on that, and you'll be pretty good for PvPing. Many tips on how to get better at PvP aspect of Rust can be found on my channel, as recent as my latest video, so check that out if you need any help with PvPing in Rust, and it'll probably greatly improve the amount of fun you have in Rust, as a lot of it is PvP. Finally of all, here are just some tips which I think are quite useful for advancing in Rust. Oil rig. Oil rig can be really good for getting guns, as you can do it with just a shotgun and a bow. It can give you tier 3 guns, such as AK, bolts, and M39, and of course tier 2 guns too. It is quite hard to do the oil rig without a proper gun, and doing the heavy scientists is the part which gives you the most loot. But I also have made a video on how to do the heavy scientists, so that shouldn't be too difficult. You will also need cards for the oil rig, so monuments is necessary. And if you want to do oil rig, of course you're going to need a boat to get there, so the entrance fee is quite high, but the loot you can get from it is insane. Cargo ship is also really good, as you don't need cards, and you get free crates instead of just one, but of course you miss out on the scientist loot. The hard bit about cargo ship isn't the scientists, it's actually the players which come to counter. But if you have decent PvP skills, it should be easy to keep control of. The biggest tip is just to check the map always, so whenever the ship does come out, you're the first on it. Being first means you have a massive advantage with defense, and usually means you can get the loot unscathed. Cargo ship of course gives tier 3 guns and tier 2 guns, and many useful blueprints. But I think that's all the information you need for this video. Let me know if you guys would like a part 2, and if you have any questions, let me know in the description, and I'll try to reply to them all. Thanks so much for watching until the end, I appreciate it a ton, and check out the videos which pop up here.